Hey everyone, welcome to another Keto and Crime Classic. Today I've got a special double-length episode on the Enron scandal from 1985 until 2002 when it finally went away officially. Enron was one of the largest energy companies, quote unquote, and I use that term very loosely, in existence. And its apparent misuse, scams, and moving around of money to hide losses became what television, literally television shows and movies and books are written about. It fell from a high of over $79 a share to zero and was basically one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in history. It also has still, the effects of it are still felt around the world, particularly in California, who I don't think has ever completely recovered from the thrashing that Enron gave them by creating basically a fictitious energy shortage in that state. And so that's what we're going to talk about today in a special double episode of Keto and Crime. So 2018 Tracy is going to tell you about the 1985 to 2002 case of Enron. Let's jump into it, shall we? Hey everyone, Keto Comic here. Welcome to White Collar Crime Wednesday, special Thursday edition because your girl was late. I'm sorry, but this was the ultimate booger bear. This has so many moving parts. I'm going to get out part one today. I'm going to get you go through the major players, kind of the basics of the scandal, all the way up to an early scandal that preceded what we know as the Enron scandal. And then the next episode, which will be out next Wednesday, I will go over what we know as the Enron scandal all the way up to the trial and the aftermath. So, a lot of moving parts. Not only was this the downfall of two companies, Enron and Arthur Anderson Accounting, but it was also a downfall of a lot of families. It tarnished the Bush reputation, and it led to the early 2001 energy crisis in California, which was faked largely in part by Enron, and also led to basically the deposing of a governor in California and the election of the Terminator himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So Arnold Schwarzenegger came out very strongly against Enron. That was one of the major reasons he was elected in California, because of the shenanigans with the energy crisis. So a lot of moving pieces. So let's get into it, shall we, by going over the major players. All right, here we have what we're going to call the two major ringmasters of this scandal. First, Kenneth. Kenneth is credited for being the founder of Enron, but really he was more of a figurehead. He was a high-ranking official in one of the smaller companies that merged with another company to form Enron, Houston Natural Gas, and kind of led the way for Enron's expansion. He was the first CEO. He led them a certain point, then turned over to Jeff Skilling and Lou Powell, who we'll also cover, and then kind of stepped back to be the chairman of the board of directors, and then was made CEO again towards the end after Skilling resigned, when everything started to break apart. But Kenneth, is credited with being the founder of Enron, though he's more just a guiding force. But he was born April 12, 1942, Tyrone, Missouri, to Ruth and Omar Lay, who was a Baptist minister. So religion was very important to the Lays. They remained true Southern Baptists right to the end, both his first wife and then later on his second wife, who that's a whole story we'll get into, but basically had an affair with a secretary, divorced his wife, married her, but still remained very good friends with his first wife, which we'll get into all that. So he laid the groundwork for what would become Enron. He helped found it in 1985 and was its CEO at its death in 2001. Then we have Jeff Skilling, born November 25th, 1953, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Betty and Thomas Eppelhart Skilling Jr. He basically, his father was a salesman. He grew up primarily New Jersey after they moved there after his birth. He was one of 4 children and went on to study accounting and actually was an accountant in the finance department, which is how he caught Lay's eye. Lay actually went into the Navy, got a certain amount of his education there, advancing to the rank of lieutenant, and eventually studying economics at both the University of Missouri and later on the University of Houston, where he had an advanced degree in economics. Very intelligent man. Both of them were. So they would become the primary navigators of this scandal we know as Enron. Well, we know them to be now. They both claimed to their all through the trial that they knew nothing about it, but we'll get into that. These two played very important roles in two polar opposite ways. Andy Fastow was a protege of Jeff Skilling when he joined Enron in the accounting department. They're all accountants somehow. And he was born December 22nd, 1961, to Carl and Joan Fastow, Washington, D.C. He studied accounting. He was a Harvard man, just like Jeff Skilling. He became their CFO, and he was their CFO from almost the time he joined the company to the time the company went down. Jeff Skilling's protege, and Jeff Skilling had one major mantra: hide losses. We always have to keep the stock price climbing, and they kept it climbing. Absolutely, they kept it climbing until it didn't, and that's how most scandals come unraveled. But Fastow was the architect of both the accounting deception and the stock price manipulation that would keep that price rising, and he took the hardest fall for it, definitely. On the other side, you have Sharon Watkins. She was born August 28th, 1959, Tomball, Texas, also an accountant, previously worked for Arthur Andersen, who we'll discuss in our next little segment, also a major player. But she is credited with being the whistleblower, or one of the main whistleblowers that came forward to bring the scandal down, at least on the stock manipulation side of it, which got the SEC to investigating. Now, she was named a Time Woman of the Year. She's been celebrated as this great hero. She even has documented proof that she went to Ken Lay after Jeff Skilling had already stepped down and Ken Lay had become CEO again at the end, telling him that there was accounting errors, accounting exaggerations, and he needed to look into it. He totally discounted her warning, and eventually when she saw there was the writing was on the wall, she became a whistleblower. Now, do I think she is a true American hero? No. I think she knew more than she let on, and I think she jumped and became a whistleblower to save her own buttocks, which it's human nature to do that. I don't down her for that, but do I think she is an American hero? No, I think she saved her ass. So, but keep these two names in mind, as you will definitely hear them again. And here we get into minor players at best, but Liu Pao, born 1941, Beijing, China, he was a CEO of Enron. He was never indicted during the scandal. It was never proven that he knew anything. So we are led to believe that Fastow and Skilling and Lay at that time were able to keep everything kind of under wraps, and so perhaps he didn't know, but he was more of a lead figure in this. He became more infamous for sexual scandals that would rock Enron. He laid down a policy of hiring ex-strippers to fill various secretarial positions at Enron, and eventually had an affair with one of them that was his secretary, got her pregnant, divorced his wife of 20 years, cashed out $250 million of stock right before the scandal broke. He got out about 2000. The scandal broke in 2001 and ensconced away. He literally got away scot-free. Now, as I said, there's no proof that he knew anything, but when you're at that level, you have to wonder. His main defense was, I was too busy chasing women to concern myself with the books. And I guess that's an honest answer, but still. But we'll get a lot more into the scandal as we go on. Another two major players were Arthur Andersen accounting firm. Arthur Andersen was once one of the big ones, the big four, as they're called in accounting, with Arthur Andersen, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte Touche, and some others that made up. I mean, they do things like count the votes for the Oscars, the Tonys. They audit major corporations, which was Arthur Andersen's shtick. They were founded in 1914, had a brilliant career for the first 40, 50 years, and then got caught up into some scandals in the 1970s, though it was never truly proven they knew anything about it, that they were just as, duped as everyone else. But mainly their shtick was auditing companies. They didn't actually do the in-house accounting, but they were responsible for checking the books and making sure everything was on the up and up. And that was their major thing. And that's what they did for Enron, and totally turned a blind eye because they were being paid upwards of about $1 million a month to perform these accounting audits for them. So $1 million a month is a lot of money, and I can understand why they might be tempted to turn a blind eye to some of the shenanigans going on at Enron. In fact, let's take a look at a clip from an early Arthur Andersen commercial so you can kind of see the prestige that was behind them. One moment.
It's not the rocket that put man on the moon. It's the intelligence that fueled it. It's not the bat that created the legend. It's the skill that powered it. It's not the instrument that stirs the spirit. It's the imagination behind it. And it's not information technology that will make your company more successful. It's the vision to apply it.
So you can see we were dealing with a very prestigious accounting firm. But unfortunately for them, they got lazy. They decided that their money was more important, and so they were indicted in not only the Enron scandal for failure to find accounting missteps, but also with other big scandals such as WorldCom and the Southern Baptist Association of Arizona, which was basically a Ponzi scheme that built Baptists out of millions of dollars. So they went down in flames shortly thereafter. Enron did in 2001. So kind of the end of an era there with the ending of Arthur Andersen. Someone else that needs to be implicated in this is the Bush family. Now, I'm not talking, here's George W. and his wife, along with some other diplomats. They may be actual relatives of the Bushes, I'm not real sure. But we're talking about George H.W. Sr., we're talking about George W. Bush Jr., and we're also talking about Jeb Bush. We're all huge fans and friends of Ken Lay. Now, Ken Lay has a huge, Missouri, Texas background. He did some work in the Navy for George H.W. Bush, so he was close there. He also developed a great working relationship with George W. Bush when he was governor of Texas, and up to loaning the Bushes their private jet, the Enron private jet, when they needed it. They were at parties. They knew each other very well. I'm not saying the Bushes knew anything about the scandal, but I'm saying that they gave Ken Lay and Enron the power necessary to pull off the scandal, because right up to George Bush's energy chief being an Enron appointee. So it was just a lot of stuff. In fact, there's some videos that surfaced when Ken Lay via video. I'm going to show you a brief clip of that just so you can see how heavily entwined he was with the Bush family. One moment.
The largest corporate contributor to the first presidential campaign of George W. Bush.
This is not a political issue. It is a business issue. Enron had made contributions to a lot of people around Washington, D.C. And if they came to this administration looking for help, they didn't find any.
So, as you can see, there was a lot of conspiracy going on. It wasn't just, I'm not saying the Bushes were involved, but I'm saying they kind of gave him the power he needed to be able to pull this off en masse. So, let's move on. All right. So, basically, Enron was formed in 1985. With a merger between two natural gas companies. Ken Lay had developed a reputation for being able to get money out of natural gas. Natural gas at that time was considered kind of a cheap commodity. It was kind of an offshoot of the oil business, particularly in Texas. The natural gas was just a byproduct that could be used for some things, but it was generally considered a waste product at that time. But Ken Lay realized by building pipelines that kind of went everywhere in the country, he could very cheaply move natural gas and turn it into a profitable deal. And that's what he did for his employer, Houston Natural Gas. He helped develop a pipeline system where they could basically service people way outside of Texas. And so he caught the industry's eye at that point, and eventually Houston Natural Gas merged with another natural gas company, Internorth, to form Enron. And Enron was basically a natural gas company, though they got into a lot of other things. So they were taking what was considered a cheap byproduct of the oil industry and using it for other matters. And the natural gas business kind of blew up. By the end of its run, Enron employed approximately 29,000 people, mostly in their corporate headquarters in Houston. They had become not only a natural gas provider, but an electricity provider. This is where we step into the California energy crisis, and also a communications company and pulp and paper company. So they had delved into a lot of different things by the time they went down. They had revenues of nearly $101 billion during the year 2000. So they showed a lot of profit. That was true profit, but they showed a lot of profit. But the problem is that they weren't really a profitable company. All I can say is that everything revolved around Jeff Skilling's vision of the stock price always going up. And so they did everything that they could to make that happen, irregardless of what was really going on. Enron, at its core, was deeply in debt. It had taken out huge loans to build pipelines, to build paper and pulp processing companies, to build power plants, to become an electricity provider, and all of that was debt. And anytime a company increases its debt, its stock price will decrease because it's just not worth anything. It doesn't have huge cash reserves. It's not a target for takeover because it's just not profitable with a lot of debt. It's the same with your personal finances. If you have too much debt, you have a low net worth. Same with a company. So Jeff Skilling's strategy with Alan Fastow was to hide that debt. And how did they hide it? With a little bit of shenanigans called creating companies with mutual interests. I'm going to go over this again, but remember that. They created companies and deals with companies with mutual interests. And what that means is they created shell companies or subsidiaries that only existed in name. And they would hide this debt as business deals with this company and these companies, and it would come off the balance sheet and show them as profitable, which allowed the stock price to keep moving up. So that was the core of the big Enron scandal, although there was a lot more moving parts to it that we're going to get into it. But this started almost from day one, they think, with Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling. He took out major amounts of debt to make Enron be a big natural gas and electricity provider, so he hid the debt in shell companies, and Andy Fastow continued this in mass. And we'll go over some of the unusual names he picked for these companies to hide this debt. But think of that building from 1985 all the way to 2001. That practice was still in play and was the cornerstone of the scandal. Now, there were some early scandals that brought Ken Lay's integrity into question. 1987, we have the Valhalla scandal, which basically referred to Valhalla, New York, where Enron employed 3 different energy traders. Now, energy trading was big in the 80s. It's still big to a certain extent, but it's based on projections, and it's about the closest thing you can get to gambling without actually being in Vegas. But pretty much, Enron employed 3 different energy traders, and they were scamming the company for millions. They were giving these false projections to the company about how the price of electricity, natural gas, all kinds of energy were rising, and they were encouraging the company to invest more. Well, they were doing some accounting shenanigans, and they were pocketing millions of dollars. And they eventually got busted and ended up in federal prison. But Ken Lay claimed absolute immunity because he said he didn't know about it. He would never have employed people like that. But later on, tapes surfaced of him actually saying to one of them, how many millions of dollars can you bring in? Continue bringing it in. Because even though those losses were false, it still caused that stock price to what? Go up. Now keep that in mind. Stock prices continuing to rise no matter what, because of essentially faking profits and hiding losses. So this Valhalla scandal broke. The traders went to prison, but somehow Ken Lay managed to come out of it by saying he didn't know. So he escaped prosecution in one scandal. And then they delved full force into becoming they didn't want to just become the biggest energy company in the world. They wanted to become the biggest company in the world. So that was their purpose for the years 1988 to 2001 when they all collapsed. So they continued the practice of market-to-market trading, which mainly means they traded between other energy companies. They traded energy, although they were doing it honestly now, I suppose. They continue to hide losses, and they made most of their money on trades, not profits. So again, all the executives were making a pretty penny off of the rising stock price, not on actual profits. And that continued over all the subsequent years, hiding losses and estimating deals, faking deals, making them appear more. These are real deals, but they're inflating the numbers to immediately cash in on stock options and bonuses was the name of the game at Enron from almost entirely its inception. So it was based on a house of cards that would eventually fall. Last week we kind of went into the players, the overall picture, and the history of Enron. Now we're going to jump right into what started to cause its downfall. And to do that, we have to start out with Enron's internal policies. I actually have a subscriber whose mom was an HR person within Enron, and she was kind enough to give me some information that really helped me out. So along with what she was able to tell me and just a lot of research that I've done, I read the book Enron's Smartest Guys in the Room. I've watched every documentary, read every article I can find. So I've been able to piece together kind of a story of what went on there. So we already know the major players: Ken Lay, the founder of Enron; Jeff Skilling, the major CEO; Andy Fastow, Sharon Watkins, those people. So we kind of have an understanding of who the players are, but let's take a look at the empire that they built and how they kept it such a close-knit environment where no one would basically leak any information. In fact, Sharon Watkins was the first one to turn whistleblower, and that wasn't until almost right before the collapse. So they were able to keep things pretty tight there. So let's see how they did it. All right. First of all, their basic internal policies. They had a policy known as peer review. And what that meant is every 6 months, your peers would review your job performance, not just your boss, your peers. And if you didn't score in the top 85 percentile, the bottom 15% went through what they called redeployment, and that's basically being sent to a lower grade department, maybe even out into the field to do natural gas or oil. This was mostly at their corporate headquarters in Houston, but redeployment was not something you wanted to entertain, and if you could only be redeployed once. After that, if you still didn't make it into the top 85%, you were let go. So the bottom 15% of everyone turned over at least once a year. It was kind of a churn and burn situation. So there was a lot of butt kissing, as you can imagine, because your peers really did hold your fate in the palm of your hand. So in the palm of their hand. So it was like you, peer's hand, peer's fist. So as you can imagine, a lot of butt kissing going on there. I had already mentioned their policy of hiring ex-strippers to fill certain positions. There were rumors of loud and wild parties when bonuses came out. Just a lot of stuff. Also there, most people worked about 18 hours a day. They also had a habit of inflating deals. As we learned in the first part, most of Enron's bonuses came off projected profits of deals, which meant they had every motivation to inflate deal numbers. Deals would come in at 100 grand, and somehow when they were finalized, they were at 400 grand. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. They would inflate them so that they would get their bonus based off of the next 10 years of that deal, and their stock would go up because they were reporting all this profit, even though it really wasn't profit. It was basically a major exaggeration, but that's how people made their money there. So you can imagine if the chickens are controlling the hen house and the roost, you're going to have a lot of inflated deals. And no one really questioned it because it was just the way it was. And as a result, they got their huge bonuses, which is really how you get rich. You got rich at Enron, and then your stock options. And as long as these profits were being shown on their balance sheets, which they were, their P&L, stock price kept running. So they were keeping the scam going. They had been the scam as early back as like 1987 that we know of, and it was created in 1985 by the merger of two natural gas companies. So that was kind of the deal. So you had inflated profits, and you had debt being hidden. This was Jeff Skilling's main thing: hide the debt, hide the losses. So when Andy Fastow became their CFO, he was directed, hide the debt, hide the losses, and he did this in a unique way by creating shell companies and literal fake deals to hide these losses in other companies so it would get off of Enron's balance sheet. And he had a lot of unique names for these companies, as you can see here. Death Star was basically one that dealt with the California energy crisis, which we're going to cover in just a few minutes on its own because it was such a huge part of that. But he was a big Star Wars, like movie buff, so a lot of his stuff came from Star Wars and from Jurassic Park, the original, not the new ones. Hate those, not the best. Anyway, but Chewbacca's company, Chuco, was basically the name for a shell company that was created along with the California prison system, one of the private prisons in California, for basically a pension fund. So it was basically an investment fund between that Enron handled for this California prison system. An energy company handling investments, handling a retirement fund. Right. So basically they paid the California prison system a certain amount of money, and then they had the shell company that was an LLC recognized, Chuco, and they could just tuck losses and bad deals right in there and get it off. So Chuco collapsed after a few years, but Enron didn't because they were kind of shoveling all this stuff into it. Enron had a history of branching into other things, not just energy and natural gas, but they also got into broadband internet. They got into investments. They also got into some risk management stuff, which we'll talk about, but they wanted to be the biggest company in the world, not just energy. So you see a lot of weird things happening. And it makes me wonder why they weren't investigated a lot sooner because of this stuff. They're an energy company. They're on the books as an energy company, but yet they're doing all these different things. So, Bushes, explain yourself. Don't come for me, please. I'm poor. You'll get nothing. Then you had a company called Raptor, named after the villainous dinosaur in the first Jurassic Park. And this was basically a shell company formed along with Wachovia, Chase, Citigroup, Merrill Lynch, and other major banks and investment firms to basically do nothing but buy Enron's bad deals. So basically it was fraud. They basically paid these banks to take their bad deals off their books. And later on, some executives of Merrill Lynch, Chase, Citigroup's, Wachovia were also indicted during the trials. And I think a lot of them were acquitted, but some of them had to serve a little time for this. But basically, these were buying back Enron's bad deals, their losses, and some stock to make that stock price continue to go up. Can you imagine paying somebody to take your junk away? It's basically what it was. They might as well have had college hunks hauling junk come in, because that's essentially what they were paying these big name banks that handle your money. Always good to investigate the history of whoever's handling your money, just a warning. They even had a deal with Blockbuster, an early deal for streaming. This was when Blockbuster had basically turned away Netflix. Yeah, they had the chance to buy Netflix and didn't, and now they realized, oh, streaming might be the way of the future, so they teamed up with Enron, because of course they did, to do some broadband streaming. Of course it collapsed. Blockbuster ended the contract, but Enron still projected those profits from that lost deal out another 10 years to get more bonuses and keep the stock price rising. So really the only money they had is what little bit their natural gas and energy company could bring in, and the rest of it was just fake money off deals and profits that didn't exist. So you can see this house of cards, the cards are getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And then they got into another side of business called risk management with bankruptcy insurance. Enron, the shell corporation, the company that is teetering on the edge because they don't really have any substance of their own, got into the business of insuring people against bankruptcy. So basically these companies would pay these huge premiums 10 years out, so they get this big chunk of money in, and they would have insurance with Enron will cover them in the event that they had to file bankruptcy or any of their customers had to file bankruptcy. Basically, Enron promised to protect these companies and small businesses from losses. Yeah, I'm sure you can imagine how well that worked out. So as you can see, Enron was questionable from the first. But because they had such a close-knit fraternity / sorority / almost slave state, I hate using that word, but 18 hours a day, you know, and basically hush hush, you got to kiss your peers' butts to keep your job. They had developed a atmosphere of complete and utter silence, which is how they were able to get away with all this. Enron was the perfect storm. It absolutely was. Until the California energy crisis. But we're going to talk about Arthur Andersen and why this wasn't caught first. Then we'll get into the California energy crisis. Let's keep going. And we're back. And yes, this is a Wikipedia page. I do have the names of their audit committee on my presentation, but to get it all in there, it's squished up small, and I don't want to bore you with too much of a presentation, so I'm going to do it from here. But if any of you would ever like a copy of any of my presentations, I'll be happy to send it to you. Just let me know. But anyway, so why wasn't any of this caught? Well, it was quite simply the auditors were in their pocket. They employed Arthur Andersen, who, of course, later on came out they were not only a part of this scandal, but they were part of the WorldCom scandal, which I will do eventually, and the Southern Baptist Association of Arizona, which was literally just a Ponzi scheme. And they were in charge of auditing the books for all these people, and of course decided that their six-figure and seven-figure fees, $1 million a month from Enron alone, was worth keeping their mouth shut. Basically, Arthur Andersen had a satellite office in Enron. That's how, intertwined they were. They had about 10 or 15 auditors that worked there that were supposed to be constantly auditing books. The basic business reports that all public companies are able to put out, are required to put out by law, like the P&L, the profit, the profit and loss, balance, cash flow, all of that. They're supposed to be auditing everything in addition to the books of every department, and they're supposed to be looking over every deal too. So there was lots of room for these people to work, but they were doing nothing. There were rumors of them just playing, games, computer games, and garbage can basketball in their office instead of doing their job. They were content just to let Enron run wild. And on top of supposedly having to have all these, but they were yet still producing these audits that said everything's A-okay. We had a few mistakes, we fixed them, everything's A-okay. So not only were they just they were just complicit letting it happen, they actively participated in the fraud. They signed off on stuff they knew had either not been looked at or had been looked at and was completely wrong, and yet they still signed off on it. Again, Enron was a perfect storm. In addition, you had the audit committee, listed of these people here, that actually had more accounting experience than most audit committees. Most audit committees have, for major corporations, have a few people that are in the finance sector and accounting sector, but most of the time they're just, high-ranking officials, and maybe even government officials. But the Enron put together a good show of actually putting people that had finance and accounting background on their audit committee. Oh, look at us, we went the extra mile. But unfortunately, these people were getting huge kickbacks, or were either given false reports by Arthur Andersen that they found no issue with, because, of course, Arthur Andersen knows how to cook a book. So they didn't question it. And most audit committees only meet a few times a year, so it was really easy for them to either buy off these people or fool these people. So Enron was really good at putting on a good show. Unfortunately, for most people that associated with Enron, it didn't go the best. Anyway, let's get back. All right, now that we see how they kind of sidestepped audits and put out false audits and was able to get away with that while putting on a good show, we're going to talk about the California energy crisis of the early 2000s, actually late 1990s, early 2000s, that was really the catalyst that started cracking the foundation of Enron. Basically, it started with Governor Gray Davis, who was really a proponent, who's a Democratic governor. He was really a proponent of partial deregulation of energy. And basically what happened in California was something that had never happened before. In most states, energy companies are considered public utilities, and there's a cap on what you can charge providers, or what providers can charge the utility, as well as what the utility can charge people. That's why energy prices stay relatively low in first world countries, because there is regulation. And so it's a good thing. In California, Enron had always been lobbying for deregulation. Competition, that's always the call for people that want to deregulate, is competition will drive down prices for consumers. Not always the case, as in the oil business, which Enron was in. Enron was very highly caught up in cartels, which are basically a bunch of oil companies, either domestic or foreign, that kind of come together. OPEC's a perfect example of a cartel. It's a legalized cartel. They basically come together, agree on a price for oil, barrels of oil, or natural gas, or whatever it may be, and that's the price they charge. So competition doesn't always breed fair pricing, especially in energy. So Enron had been caught up in that cartel system, so they were able to, charge what they want for gas and oil. But now they were getting into the generation of electricity, and electricity is generated in quite a few ways: nuclear, natural gas, some oil, hydro, wind. Lots of ways electricity is formed. But most of this is done at plants on grids, where they create the energy from the raw materials, send it out onto the grid, and then the public utility that you actually pay your power bill to picks that energy up, routes it through their system, and charges you according to what they're charged or what the government allows. Now, what Gray Davis and the California legislature did was partially deregulate California's energy. So basically, there was a cap on what the utility companies could charge consumers like me and you. If we lived in California, there was a cap on what they could charge consumers, whereas there was no cap on what a provider, an energy provider like Enron, like Exxon, like whoever, could charge the utilities. So basically you had partial deregulation, which was kind of weird. So basically you had Enron was able to charge Southern California Edison, which is the major Southern California power utility, whatever they wanted for their energy, but Southern California Edison could only charge consumers up to a certain point. And for a while, this counterbalance went on, and all the California energy utilities were starting to suffer, perhaps going bankrupt. So they went back to the legislature and asked them to please uncap what we can charge consumers, or cap what Enron and other energy providers could charge us. So they did that. They raised the cap on what could be charged to consumers. They also lowered the cap on what could be charged to utilities. So, but Enron wasn't having this. They wanted their profits to stay high. So what they started doing is getting traders to trade energy. Remember the Valhalla scandal, how they basically said energy was worth more than it was and scammed a lot of money for themselves? They started doing that with California Energy, raising that price so that they could systematically raise what they charge energy utilities. So let's say the energy is really worth $10 a share or $10 a kilowatt. They would kind of manipulate the trading of that energy, and now, oh, it's worth 30, when in reality it's really only worth 10. So now we can charge. They have a reason to go to the legislature and say, this is why we need to charge that. So the utilities are still getting scammed off of that. And then there was also a clause where energy generated or that comes from outside California could have a higher tag price than energy produced within California. So you had a lot of the utilities that actually had to shut down part of their grid because of this. And Enron would actually have their energy produced in California routed outside California into Texas or New Mexico or Arizona, have it finished there, and then send it back to California as if it was produced outside California and artificially inflated the prices there. Enron also took several of their power plants offline because they wanted to force, supply and demand. If there's not a lot of stuff, the price goes up. If there's a lot of stuff, the price goes down. That's just the way it is. So they took a lot of power plants offline to produce an artificial energy shortage. And that's why California entered into an energy crisis. And that's why, you remember, California had rolling blackouts. They just weren't producing enough energy. There were plenty of plants to produce exactly what's needed, but Enron took a lot of them offline, so there wasn't enough power to supply the people of California. So they were paying 3-4 times as much, and there wasn't enough. There were areas that were without power for days, weeks at a time, because there wasn't enough energy. So as you can see, Enron really manipulated the state of California. And I don't want to get into politics. I know a lot of people don't like I love California. A lot of my friends are there. I have family there. I spend about 6 months out of the year there in LA, in the Central Valley, and Northern California when I'm touring. I love California. California provides 1/3 of our economy here in the United States. It's the 6th largest economy in the world. People better, if you're religious, pray for California. Keep California safe, because California, if it ever went offline, we'd starve to death because most of our food comes from there. They also pay the majority of the taxes that are paid to the federal government, and they're pretty much self-sustaining. They could actually probably be a country on their own for the most part. So you really need to take care of California. Don't let people tell you that California just needs to drop off into the ocean. No, you would starve, I would starve, and prices would jump up. 6th largest economy in the world. Think about that. So you can imagine how much money was involved with this manipulation, this creation of a shortage, the manipulation of the prices before they created the shortage, what a big toll it took. And now you have rolling blackouts. And this is affecting hospitals, retirement homes, schools, and things start to fall apart in California. So things are falling apart in California late 2000, early 2001. You have people protesting Enron in the streets in California because they know where their energy's coming from, and they know there's no shortage. You have people protesting at the Capitol in Sacramento, and then you had some tapes leaked. I know a lot of this is kind of out of order here, but all this kind of happened in such close time proximity, it's really hard, but you had some tapes leaked. And this really started the downfall in California. There were 2 tapes leaked. There was tapes of Jeff Skilling at an investor's dinner where he told a joke that said, what's the difference between California and the Titanic? The Titanic's lights were still on when it went down. Yeah. So that really showed the attitude that Enron had toward California. It was just a profit thing. They didn't care anything about the people of California. They only cared that their stock price kept going up and they were making all this money on trades because they were causing a shortage, an artificial shortage in California. There was plenty of energy to be had. They were just taking some of it offline because they wanted to charge more money. People were starting to protest at the Capitol, and then a tape from 2 Enron traders leaked talking about a fictional elderly person that was going to come after them because they turned their lights off. Now, you can find any of these tapes. Just Google them on YouTube. Just YouTube them. You can find, I was going to put some of the clips in here, but you can literally find any of this just by a simple search. I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look at them. It will really make your blood boil. But those things started coming out, so of course, voters in California aren't too happy. There's a call to basically recall Gray Davis, the governor, because they feel he's in cahoots with Enron and he's done little to put Enron back in line because he partially deregulated, then deregulated some more, then regulated a little bit. It's a lot of, But basically, there was a recall vote, and Arnold Schwarzenegger came out strong against Enron, came out strong against Gray Davis. He was recalled. Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California. He terminated Gray Davis, I guess you could say. So all that's happening in California. The new government forced Enron to bring all their power plants back online, cap what could be charged at both ends, and Enron was settled in. Either stop doing business in California or play by the rules. And of course, stock prices started slowly falling because they weren't artificially inflating them anymore. Then, February 2001, Bethany McLean, a writer for Fortune magazine, produced an article, Is Enron Overpriced? And she cited California, she cited some other, Valhalla, she cited some other instances that really started cracks forming. So you had all this going on in California. Prices are starting to fall naturally because they can't charge as much anymore. Now you have this article that comes out saying, hey, they're overpriced. A lot of people read Fortune. So there's another crack starting to form. Shares in April of 2001, shares were at like $66 for Enron. By the end of April, they were down to $35. That's how fast they fell because people are starting to realize this company's not as profitable as we thought. They're not worth as much as we thought. So all of this starts to come out. August 2001, Jeff Skilling resigns. Shortly after he called an investor an asshole at a thing because the investor was wanting to see some books that had not been produced. He said, it's a law that you do this. And Jeff Skilling actually looked at him and said, oh, thanks for the tip, asshole. So a lot of stuff happening. Jeff Skilling resigns. Ken Lay takes back over as CEO. He fires Andy Fastow in October, about the time that Moody's and Fitch, because Enron is in the risk management insurance business, with the bankruptcy insurance, they have a Standard & Poor's or a Moody's and Fitch report, A+, A-, you've seen those. He was fired about the same time that Moody's and Fitch downgraded Enron from their famous A- down to a B. And so it started to churn and turn, and the whole foundation started coming out. This is about the time that, about October, September, when Sharon Watkins went to Ken Lay and said, hey, we've been a little too creative with our accounting. You need to take a look at this. He said he would. Of course, he didn't. She resigned not long before the bankruptcy and went public, whistleblower to the FBI and the SEC with what she knew about Enron. And basically, November 30th, Enron filed the biggest bankruptcy, corporate bankruptcy in world history. USA history, might be world history. You have to fact check me on that, but definitely in United States history. December 2001, they laid off all their corporate employees, except for a few that were kept on to manage the people that were in the field. Now remember, we all talk about Enron as if it was just that building, but they had power plants, they had natural gas fields, they had all kinds of stuff all across the country, pipelines. where blue-collar people worked. So those blue-collar people were kept on to kind of put that to bed, and as those assets were slowly sold off to other owners. But a few corporate employees remained and got huge bonuses on top of everything else, while everybody else at corporate lost their job. About this time, SEC and FBI investigation started. The Bush family, and that recording we saw in the first part, came out against Enron, saying they had no help from this administration. Who knows? And so their public image just went. All the investigations started, and in 2006, over 22 people were indicted and tried. About 16 of them pled guilty and received reduced sentences. I won't go into all those names. We'll just talk about what happened to the major players. But a lot of people pled guilty and took lesser sentences, about 16. All right, so let's get into what happened. Ken Lay, the founder and then CEO of Enron, was found guilty of 6 counts of wire fraud and misleading investors. But before he could be sentenced, he died July 5th, 2006, at his winter home, at his summer home in Colorado. But of course he did. I don't want to say I'm not glad anybody died, but it's just, I think the stress kind of gave him a heart attack, and he did pass on as a result. So he was never actually punished for what he did. Jeff Skilling, found guilty on 19 counts of wire and securities fraud. He was acquitted on insider trading because they determined there wasn't enough proof that he personally profited from finagling, and he is still serving his 24 years in federal prison. Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling both pointed the finger at Andy Fastow, said this was all Fastow's doing. We didn't know what was going on. That was their game. Well, Andy Fastow turned state's witness. Of course he did. Because, he got offered a deal. He knew the most about what was going on. He was being blamed, so I guess he figured he had nothing to lose. Can't blame him. He turned state's witness, was so impressive in his testimony against his former bosses and colleagues that he was rewarded by only serving 6 years in prison. His wife, who was an auditor and a treasurer trustee for Enron, also turned state's evidence and received a 1-year term in federal prison and a 1-year suspended sentence, and she's already out, as is Fastow. So while Ken Lay is dead, Jeff Skilling's still sitting in prison. Arthur Anderson, the accounting firm, found guilty of obstruction of justice. They had to surrender their license to do accounting in 2002, and as a result, closed its doors, laying off 85,000 employees. And there were approximately 16 other people that pled guilty and received reduced sentences that were high-ranking board members, high-ranking executives, mid-level managers that should have known or did know about the fraud. And that's it in a nutshell. You could actually teach a college course on Enron. As a result, that's what led to the Saxby-Oxnard rule that had really close Wall Street oversight. So you had a lot of new regulations come out as a result of that our current administration is trying to kind of lessen. I believe there's a balance there, but then again, you always have bad players like this that ruin it for everybody. Well, that's Enron in pretty much a nutshell. I did about an hour and 10 minutes on this over the 2 parts, so I hope that I did it justice. If any of you have any comments, please let me know. I hope you're enjoying these. I really enjoy doing them. Thank you so much. And remember, y'all, I'll be back soon. Remember, y'all, ketosis, keto comic.